Sheila Balgobin, the Dream Decipherer, presents A Soul Blossoms, a brief case study on electrosensitivity. This brief case study looks at the impact of fluorescence therapy on a client's extreme electrosensitivity. Precedence for using flower essences in psychotherapy and psychiatry is well documented in Cuba, where flower essences are issued on the Cuban National Health Service as a medical specialty. During this presentation, I'll be sharing this case study during which flower essences were used with a counseling client suffering with extreme electrosensitivity. But before presenting the particulars of this case study, I'd like to talk about the essences used, as the choice of essences used was directly related to the circumstances. I used my own Spirit of Makasutu essences, which were made in Gambia, Jamaica, Florida, and the UK. Spirit of Makasutu is one of the few essence ranges that I know of that are made with a non-alcoholic preservative called red shiso. The reason why I chose to use my own range of flower essences will become clearer as we delve further into the case study. But for the moment, I'd like to share a few facts with you about red shiso, the preservative that I use. Red shiso is 1,000 times more powerful than synthetic food preservatives. It's used across Asia for pickling purposes, including umeboshi plums from Japan, turning them a beautiful pink color. Energetically, red shiso is also very interesting as it amplifies the vibration of the essences that it's mixed with and seems to harmonize them. What that means is that even with a larger than normal number of essences being combined, clients seem to experience the effect of each and every essence used without any of the effects getting lost. Before we start, let me introduce you to Arlene. Arlene, whose name and certain details have been changed, is white, British, in her 60s, and lives in London. She's been trapped in her home by extreme electrosensitivity for over 5 years, and prior to that, worked for 15 years with very toxic substances. Arlene also has mercury fillings, and her family relationships are extremely poor. Arlene is a devout Buddhist and is registered disabled because of her electrosensitivity and therefore on limited income. A reflexologist colleague from a small charity that I worked with referred Arlene to me, suggesting that counseling may be helpful to her. Arlene was also very interested in learning what exactly was the root cause of her electrosensitivity. She knew that there were physical reasons for it, but felt that there was something more to it. Arlene was also open to the idea of using flower essences to help her explore her inner world, along with other holistic means of healing.
To give you an idea of just how dire things were for Arlene, one of the few places that she would go to get fresh air and avoid all microwaves and of any kind was the local cemetery. Thankfully, no one has gotten around to putting in Wi-Fi in graveyards. It's a sad and telling activity. The only place Arlene felt at home was among the dead.
After an initial session to discuss working together and agreeing terms, Arlene and I began our journey together. Over the next 5 months, this is what happened.
The first month that Arlene and I worked together, the following essence blend was used, composed of red hibiscus, pink oleander, baobab, orange, and crocodiles of Cachacali. Now, you'll notice that there were little asterisks next to various essences that are used during this presentation. And these represent what I call the bêtes noires, or black beasts, of particular clients. And what that simply means is that these are images that inspire dislike or discomfort or something even stronger. And I always ask the client if they're willing to have these bêtes noires in their blends, because they usually represent the very issue that the client is trying to avoid dealing with. So I give them the choice, but it comes up for a reason. So after coming up with a blend based on the interview that was done with Arlene, Arlene began to notice discomfort in her throat and often had crying spells. She eventually noticed a connection between these bouts of tears and feeling constriction. Arlene became aware of some of the basic feelings that she had about herself, including that she was unwelcome here on earth, that she felt humiliated and helpless, and experienced an unexplained sense of loss. She also felt very dependent. But at the heart of all of these emotions was the fact that Arlene felt she had no right to be here on Earth. In months 2 and 3, Arlene continued to take orange, pink oleander, and red hibiscus essences. To those, we now added yellow trumpet bush, jasmine, saw palmetto, and prickly pear. During this time, Arlene's mood had clearly improved, which was borne out by psychological outcome profiles scores. This was accompanied by copious amounts of tears. Arlene had begun to expand her notions regarding her personal space, and was learning that it was her own thoughts that often sabotaged her efforts to engage with the world. Slowly but surely, she began to expand her boundaries to include the outside world. Arlene noticed that her left side felt blocked. Not painful, but noticeable. Her throat, however, felt much clearer, and even her GP commented that she appeared stronger and more grounded. Arlene was changing. She even began to look different. She was calmer, more confident, and grounded. Arlene was also learning to assert herself when it came to defending her rights, and began to allow herself to feel angry. Arlene was beginning to learn to focus on what she could do rather than what she could not. Arlene began to find places she could go and be among people without becoming ill. And during one of these days out, she discovered a dark green turquoise, which she felt she was drawn to during a crystal healing session she had with me in the weeks that we started working together. When Arlene asked me what this crystal was good for, I was pleased to tell her that it was for electrosensitivity and toxicity of all kinds, including emotional toxicity. Although Arlene was changing her view of herself, she hadn't entirely let go of her negative self-talk. She stated she was drawn to a dark green turquoise because she was too mousy to feel comfortable wearing a bright blue or light green turquoise. During months 4 and 5, Arlene's essence blend changed completely. Now the blend was composed of bougainvillea, corn poppy, and yellow frangipani. Arlene reported during this time that since obtaining her turquoise pendant, painful incidents from the past surged forward, and she began to see her own role in the creation of these situations. Arlene finally realized that when she didn't assert herself, it was she who paid the price. in silent anger and humiliation. Arlene also began to consider the notions of forgiveness and compassion for her family and friends. As a Buddhist, these concepts resonated with her and gave her a lot of food for thought. Arlene finally acknowledged the fact that she would probably never have a good relationship with her family, and that she would have to create a family with friends who loved and accepted her as she was. More importantly, she could now forgive her family for their actions and behavior towards her. It was around this time that Arlene found a Zumba class near her home that she could attend safely and was absolutely thrilled. In the class, she could socialize as much or as little as she wished and was doing something that made her feel good. Around this time, she also became concerned about where she would spend the Christmas holidays. Her family was clearly not an option. I never learned what Arlene decided. Just before Christmas, she canceled her appointment with me and informed me she would get back to me with a new date. Unfortunately, that date never arrived, but the short time that we worked together showed a depth of progress on Arlene's part that I really don't believe would have occurred so quickly or profoundly without flower essences. While this was far from being a formal study, it's my hope that further research will be taken in this growing area of concern that is electrosensitivity. I hope this case study will be the first step in showing how souls can blossom with a little help from our flower friends. During my time working with Arlene, I had her fill in my mop and cyclops forms, which were to measure her psychological state and her well-being. And while it wasn't a complete study, it did yield some interesting results. But the stats only tell half the story. I learned a lot about electrosensitivity as a health issue from the inside. It even affected how I could practice. For example, having to turn off my mobile phone before entering the house and leaving messages for her carer to respond to on the client's behalf once a week. It was only, however, in addressing the emotional life of this client that a breakthrough became possible. And I believe that without the use of essences, this would not have occurred with the speed and depth at which it did. Although the data isn't complete, the My Mop and Cyclops forms that Arlene filled out during the time we worked together yielded some very, very interesting information, though not quite in the way you would expect. A look at these stats in isolation would suggest that this client had shown little improvement over the 4 to 5 month period during which she used the essences. However, I have noticed in another informal flower essence study I carried out several years ago, statistical data only tells part of the story. For example, in month 2, Arlene showed an improvement in her scores, with the most significant improvement being shown in well-being. The subsequent worsening of scores in months 3 and 4 also saw the greatest improvement in Arlene's sense of self and insight. If I were to look at the My Mop and Cyclops data without taking into account what actually happened with the client, I would state that the outcome was unsuccessful and that the client actually fared worse. The challenge for adequately reporting outcomes, I believe, hinges upon the inclusion of the soft data. That is, the anecdotal evidence collected from directly working with the client. Unless some way is found to include this data, reporting would be, at best, incomplete. What I learned from working with Arlene was also invaluable. I came to understand that toxic emotions were just as deadly as the chemical toxins that had damaged Arlene's health. Arlene's internalized negative thought patterns, or mental malware as I call it, and her expectations trapped her in her home more than her physical symptoms. The essences supported and encouraged the release of Arlene's emotional toxins and fostered growth in a profound way. When Arlene cried the most, she herself noticed that she gained greater insight into herself. I found that a multifaceted approach was important, and not just with Arlene, but with all my clients. Essences were used alongside visualizations, crystals, Reiki, tending green plants, and even Arlene's Tibetan bowls. There isn't a magic bullet that will resolve all of the issues faced by any given client. It seems that this somewhat eclectic approach works best. And in keeping with the words of Dr. Edward Batch, the modern-day creator of flower essences and creator of the Batch flower remedies, stated, "I work with the client and not the disease."
Are you in need of help to sort out your own difficult feelings? Are you ready to set your soul free to blossom? If you are ready, book a complimentary exploratory call and get a made-to-order stress-busting essence blend for yourself. You can book at www.meetingwithsheila.com or get in contact with me on social media by scanning the above QR code. Isn't it time for you to set your soul free to blossom?